Okay, can I call us to order for this fringe meeting organised by ResPublica on the subject of cities? For those of you who read the web programme and were expecting the Guardian's Jackie Ashley, you will be astute enough to have noticed that I am not Jackie Ashley, and nor am I from the Guardian. My name's Mike Emmerich. I'm from Manchester, and I'm one of the speakers, and I'm delighted to be chairing this excellent event this evening. I think the way we're going to do it is I'll say a few words to sort of open up the scope of our discussion this evening, and then we're going to go to the panellists, starting with Chris Murray and then to Malcolm and to Phillip, before asking Greg Clark to reflect on what he's heard in what we've all said. I think it's common at fringe meetings like this to start by saying that this is the most important issue on the planet, and sometimes it's true. I want to say that it's not the most important issue on the planet. The thing we're sitting here talking about today is actually a really important question, and not just for our cities. I think this is a question of real deep importance for our whole country, and I want to say why. The world is growing, we know that. We hear about the bricks all the time. But the world is also urbanising. And it's that urban growth, particularly in China and Russia and India, but also other places like Brazil and a whole range of other countries as well. It's that growth that's fueling the world economy. And although we spend much of our time, quite rightly, thinking about what's going on in Greece, the fact is that China's creating a new Greece about every 6 weeks, a new Spain every few months. And I think the most important point is that growth is almost entirely an urban phenomenon. It's cities that are growing, absorbing the labour that's coming in from the land in these new big urban centres. They're creating dozens of cities the size of Newcastle in China alone over the next 20 years. Immediately you can see how the global economy and cities are actually one and the same question. And the question then is, well, are those cities just going to carry on making the cheap things that we all give our children at Christmas and unwrap from Walmart or wherever? No, they're not. Because the economics is very clear. There are now more English-speaking Chinese PhDs than there are people in England. They're clever people, educating themselves, developing new products and services, and if we can't sell the things that they want to buy, our future is less promising than our past. And it seems to me that the places where we should be competing in those markets are cities, because it's cities that are the centres of growth, the centres of knowledge, the centre of communications. And my contention is that we don't take our cities very seriously in this country. We take the City of London very seriously, and this summer has proved that par excellence. When we want to do something seriously, we do it better than any other nation on earth. And we take London very seriously. But it is a fact that during the longest period of growth since records began before this recession, during the highest ever peacetime increase in public spending, with programme after programme to help regenerate our cities, the gap between London and the other cities, particularly those in the north of England, got wider. So it seems to me that the challenge for us today is to talk about cities in that context of how they can bear more weight in this global economy, how more of them can power ahead to really help us gain comparative advantage. Because without that, it seems to me that we're not going to be able to enjoy the comparative advantage. And I think one of the key things, it seems to me, is that the smaller cities, the Milton Keyneses of this world, the Readings, the Brightons, they're doing quite well, but in a southeast that's already congested. So perhaps those of us who come from the north, like me, from Manchester, where I lead on economic strategy, our question is, how can we take pressure off the green belt in the south of England by growing the cities of the north, the Midlands, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, so that we can really drive economic growth across our land, create wealth, and at the same time tackle the exclusion that is so prevalent in so much of our country. So that's all I wanted to say by way of opening up this conversation today. I'm going to go next to the sponsors, co-sponsors of this event with ResPublica, to Chris Murray, who is the director of of the core cities, well, not of the centre of the cities, an easy mistake to make. Chris is someone who's been in core cities since 2006, based out of Manchester, and what he does is pull together the work of these economic engines, or these would-be economic engines of England, and he's going to talk to us now about his perspective on the future cities.
Just to check, can you hear us okay with the cooling system started behind us? Thanks, Mike. And I think we have turned a corner in England in terms of our relationship with our cities. So we stopped seeing them as problems and started seeing them as solutions to growth, climate change, social inclusion. And I think we've accepted the argument that cities drive growth in this country. I think what we've been less willing to do is to agree on how exactly we give them the tools to do that. So the city deals process that we've seen come into operation over the last few months, I think, is a really radical departure from what we've seen in the past. I think there's a reasonable awareness of what is contained in those deals. And if you don't know them, the deals are on our website, cities.com, but also on the Cabinet Office website. And I want to talk also about, I think, quite wider radical shifts that I think will be stimulated by the fact that the deals now exist. So the deals pick up on common needs within cities for things like housing growth, for infrastructure development, for more demand-led skills and employment systems. And these are all issues that have long been discussed, but there is also some real innovation in the solution that we're seeing coming through in the city deals. But the process of implementation will be really demanding, both for cities and for Whitehall. It's absolutely critical that we get that right, and that requires new kinds of bilateral cooperation, perhaps even different kinds of project teams or secondments between cities and Whitehall to get that detail right. So the deals are signed, the implementation plans are signed, they're seen as part of an ongoing process, certainly by cities and I think by governments as well. And long term we know from the evidence that what devolved places do best. And the deals are perhaps also recognition that in fact we've gone as far as we can with the centralised economic model we've got in this country in current circumstances. So there's further to go. We do need to recognise, I think, genuinely applaud where we've got to with government, what we've done, and if you don't mind me saying so, the leadership and the vision that Greg and other ministers have shown in delivering the deals. Up until now, I think devolution has been a bit like trying to shift someone from being a tea drinker to a coffee drinker by just putting a bit of coffee into the tea, a bit at a time, until you get from one place to the other, and you end up with something that's just a bit unpalatable and drinkable. And we've all been to conferences like that. Of course, not the excellent beverages provided by ResPublica this evening, but it refrained from that big step, and the deals do represent a big step. But the fact is we need to do more things differently, not just for economic reasons. There will not be the finance, the public sector finance in the system in the future to deal with the levels of need and demand socially and demographically. A wider reform, therefore, has to happen around 2020 in most of the core cities. The city authority, flexible spend, the discretionary spend, runs out as it meets rising statutory spend, mainly on need and things like adult social care. So that can only really be solved by reducing that need and looking for much more radical solutions, creating jobs and getting people out of dependency. The deals are designed to facilitate that. But I think the deals will and are already having a really profound effect across a broader range of government policies and thinking than we'd originally realised, and we really want to encourage the continuation of that. And they've set in motion some systemic shifts, and I just want to mention three briefly. The first is a shift from a needs-based to change-based policies and arguments. So as city authorities, we can't say anymore, we've got all this regeneration need. We're required to demonstrate what we're going to do about that, how it's going to be different, what the changes that we will need to make, and the term is deal, not ask, something for something. A shift from a resource-hungry requirement to a system change requirement, for example, community budgets, which are not exactly parts of the deals process, but we could see similar policy wrapped into deals perhaps in the future. And I'll just give one example, which is from Greater Manchester, the Salford Complex Families pilot, where one family had something like staggering 200 interventions in 1 year, which costed £1,000 average cost per intervention. This was 11 court appearances, 9 trips to casualty, police on the doorstep and so on. And that was reduced by 80% by agencies working in a radically different way. It's really compelling stuff. And third is from grant giving to joint investment finance. I'm seeing the beginning of this, I think, in city deals, almost like kind of endowment fund and a consolidation of finance, which is invested, which makes a return, and the various agents share in that return. So there's further shifts I think that are required, but we've already set in motion some important changes in the deals, and it's hard to overstate how radical a process that is after decades of increasing centralisation. The real shift that I think is behind this and that we now need to make is in the mindset and the culture of the way that we all work and operate to deliver the outcomes that sit behind the deals. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chris. So, if I set out what I think is the globally important nature of this challenge, I think what Chris has done is to explain, that there is a change in how government's doing policy. I think the city deals are absolutely the start of the process. But as we hear from Malcolm Harbour now, whatever else you speak about, I'm sure you'll want to talk about how, from all your extensive industrial experience, not just as an MEP, not just as chairman of the Internal Market Consumer Protection Committee, but also from your industrial experience. That's just what the scale of the challenge is compared to some other countries, about how far we've to go to support what cities and the industries in them really need.
Good, well, thank you very much. Well, it's a real special pleasure to be here. And I noticed at the opening of the conference that you weren't formally welcome to Birmingham this time. So, as a member of the European Parliament who represents the whole of the region, but with a special responsibility for Birmingham, it's really great to have a conference here and to see you all here. And also, you will see around you, and indeed the building itself, the ICC, is part of the way that Birmingham, like other thriving and great cities in the UK, has been steadily reinventing itself over the last few decades. It's a continuous process. You invited me to say a bit about my industrial experience. Well, I reflect on the fact that I started work 45 years ago in this city in the Longbridge car plant, which at that time employed 25,000 people. That plant is now the largest regeneration site in the United Kingdom. We're getting a lot of help from the Regional Growth Fund and others. We have a new College of Further Education. We have a number of incubation sites. We have housing. We have retail. We also have, very interestingly, a research and development centre for the largest Chinese car company, which occupies now what used to be my office when I was Director of Sales. So, I mean, I'm part of the sort of living pro-cycle of change that's gone on. I think the other thing that's really striking about Birmingham is that there are more people employed in delivering business services here to the global economy than there are making cars. But nevertheless, we still have a major car making operation. And that's reshaped itself. So that when I was at the Paris Motor Show last week, I was there to see the launch of the new Jaguar F-Type, which is a fantastic car, and I'm sure there may be a few customers here who want Jaguar sporting heritage, but that is going to be made at Castle Bromwich in Birmingham, and the engineering has been done in this region. Now, I think sustainability for me in the future for cities has got to be this ability to keep innovating and reinventing and to have that dynamism in economic activity, which is accelerating in the modern world. So, like all cities at the moment, Birmingham is competing very strongly for a share, particularly of the digital economy, in areas particularly like film production, serious games, software writing, applications, those sort of things. Some of which you can see just down the road here towards the custard factory, or what happened in Longbridge and other places. But actually, you know, we need to start thinking not about a digital economy. The whole economy is being driven by the adoption of new technology. So the quality of connectivity and digital connectivity is crucial, which is why people are bidding, and we've been given our share of the money the government's allocated for that. But actually we need the skills and the skilled people to be able to compete for that work, and there is actually a shortage of those people. And it's a shortage in all industries. Jaguar Land Rover, I come back to cars again, their big shortage is actually software engineers, because about 50% of the new engineering of cars is now software. Now, that I think is something that cities, and so we now have a new jargon word emerging called smart cities alongside cool cities. The government has put on the table money which I think all the core cities and a number of others are investing to prepare their plans, because the government wants to have smart city catapults, and these are, you know, you'll hear all these new jargon words coming forward, but actually helping cities to harness the knowledge within the cities, to engage universities in particular in creating that dynamic economy, but remembering that not all startup ideas come necessarily from knowledge within universities. They often come from the people who hone their skills in those universities. We do actually need to get better in this knowledge transfer from universities. And that's something that I think cities, because of the proximity of, say, great hospitals, medical schools, industrial customers, the universities themselves, we need to energise that better. I'm very pleased the Technology Strategy Board in particular, and the Regional Growth Fund, together with our local enterprise partnerships, are beginning to leverage that. Now, the other point I want to make, though, is one where I think we should be paying far more attention. Because actually, the one area where cities have a huge opportunity, because of their scale, because of their purchasing budget, because they can offer the platforms for developing new technology, is actually using the power of their public investment in products or services to constantly go out and buy those innovative new services. And in some cases, to think about procurement not in terms of an incredibly detailed specification, but in terms more of a great challenge that needs to be set to solve a major problem. And to challenge and find the local providers within the universities and small businesses to actually provide and make proposals for that, to develop them jointly, to roll them out jointly, and then to exploit them. And that also can be a source of revenue. If there's intellectual property or patents associated with that jointly funded by the city, you'll generate income streams, you'll generate jobs, and you'll have better solutions. And this is a mindset that I think we need to develop far strongly. And this is a competitive advantage that, if you like, the older established cities with those knowledge bases, those global and European connections, can really exploit. And my closing point, because you would not expect the chairman of the Parliament's Internal Market Committee to not say something about the internal market. Actually, if you're going to develop a global export business, by far the simplest place to start is to take a plane from your local airport, in our case the Great Birmingham Airport, and fly to a European city and develop your partnerships there. It's much easier to get your export business started in the European single market than it is anywhere else. And we sometimes forget the value of the single market in developing those globalizing skills for businesses, which they can then go out and tackle the really difficult and challenging markets, like China, or like India, or like Brazil. But we need to nurture our own here and really exploit better than we do the advantages of the single European market. I'm going to be working very closely with Stephen Green as a result of the reshuffle, because he's taking on the responsibility for coordinating all the European dossiers. The Conservative members of the European Parliament, like myself, are working very closely with business. And that's something that I really look forward to moving forward, and particularly to encourage their public procurement for cities. And we are working on a reform on the table now which will ensure that European rules on public procurement are there to open markets and not to tie up bureaucracy, to tie up procurement in red tape. There will be an entirely new procurement instrument called the Knowledge Innovation Partnership, which will enable public procurers to do exactly what I've described. And we've been instrumental in influencing the direction of that reform, and that will be agreed, I hope, early next year. So we are putting in practice the legal framework to try and develop the great global and innovative cities that we need in this country and indeed across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, a global challenge that I described, a really radical package of potential package of reforms through city deals, a smorgasbord of new government acronyms, but at the heart of what I heard Malcolm saying are some really practical things that I don't think, from my experience of city deals so far, and I think others would say the same, have been on the agenda yet. How can we use procurement more positively? How can we really get into skills? Though there are some other proposals like employer ownership that really should start to drive that. One of the iron lessons of public policy that I think Greg has gone some way towards breaking is that oppositions become devolutionary and governments centralised. But we're on the cusp here. I can't think of a better person to sort of try and give us some reflections on what's really going on here and whether this is a big issue or not than Phillip Blond, who's one of the most interesting commentators, philosophers in Britain today. So can you try and put some underpinnings on this debate for us, Phillip?
Goodness. And thank you very much. Great honour to be here, especially with one of the most innovative, forward-thinking and radical ministers in the government. And I think we all owe Greg a great debt of pushing through city deals. What I'd like to talk to, if I may, is begin from what works and move from there. I was very tempted to run for Mayor of Liverpool because I love the city and I also believe in a radical localism agenda. And I walked around Liverpool a lot and was visiting all the wards. And what struck me is, my God, there's so much energy that nobody gets together. And what I think is interesting about British businesses and British small businesses is they operate as individual concerns. Now, the first remark is, big businesses will not put on jobs when they grow. There's a huge phenomenon now called the jobless recovery, and big businesses grow by shedding jobs. Roughly speaking, in the 2000s, all the jobs, I think it's in the 95, 96 percentile, that were created in the United States were created by small businesses. So, if we're in the north, and I'm committed to the north, and if we're in a situation where people desperately need jobs, it's only going to come from small businesses. But British small businesses, by and large, are in a bad place. If you look around the world, if you look around Europe, as said in the earlier session, there's 3 centres of very successful small business activity: Catalonia, the Ruhr Valley, and Lombardy. What do they all do in different ways? And they sponsor this in different ways. They do supply chain competition, very simply. They don't compete as individuals. If you attempt to compete as an individual, as a small business, you will fail. What is supply chain competition? Supply chain competition is where the entire supply chain, from raw material to finished product, cooperates across provision. And it cooperates in order to compete. And it competes actually far more successfully often than big businesses. Why? Because if you use innovation as one model that fosters growth, a supply chain crosses the innovation barrier at several different points. Often a big business only crosses it at one point. You can get a network effect that's more efficient and more radical. So if supply chains they educate each point in the train. So one business at one end will say to another business at another end, you need to do something differently. Not only do they pass skills up and down the supply chain, in Italy they have peer-to-peer business lending, which is something we've hardly ever managed here. And no, they have peer-to-peer business lending, they also lend staff, they also lend expertise, and they pool their resources and hire staff who essentially manage the whole supply chain. No wonder they win, no wonder they maintain innovation, no wonder they put on jobs, and no wonder they're more resilient in times of recession. What do British businesses do? British small businesses, it's bloody hard to set up a business. It's incredibly difficult, I know. It's incredibly difficult, and you make lots of mistakes. You can't do it by yourself. But very little in our business architecture or ecosystem groups you. Even our business groups, which are very good, and I love them, they're actually vertical lobbying organisations rather than horizontal pooling organisations that can group people together. What's so imperative about cities is a city is a site of grouping. And local authorities and cities can group. They have, just as MPs have the power to convene, cities have the power to group. And cities can group in lots of different ways. They can offer lots and lots of incentives. And the incentives cities can offer can be very obvious. Rates. Rate reliefs on empty buildings. I walked through Liverpool, I was astounded at the level of empty office space. I'll come walk through Birmingham, equally astounded. To talk about the earlier point about universities are actually crucial, but one of the reasons they're crucial is labour retention and intellect retention. And it seems to me an obvious partnership would be to actually partner universities, a sector of the city, give it rate relief, so that no rates are liable for the owner if you let small businesses come in and you attempt to form a hub. Now the trouble is the hub, it's like a coin, it's been passed between us too often and the facade has worn off. It's absolutely crucial. And what we have is lots of little hubs that aren't connected to one another. We've got catapult institutions that are fantastic, we've got university outreach departments, but there's no connection often, or isn't enough of a connection. If we can group, if cities can take the preeminent role, group the LEPs, together with the universities, together with the education, together with interests and stakes, then people can give a damn. And also, why don't cities set up universal, philanthropic, peer-to-peer business lending schemes? I'm from Liverpool, there's lots of rich Liverpudlians, there's lots of people who are outside of Liverpool who would love to donate to startups, and this is true for everywhere in the world. What we have to do is set up new peer-to-peer business lending schemes, and local authorities can function as guarantors of not just credit but worthiness, so that somebody who goes into these empty office buildings is checked. You actually back their business, you actually think they might make a contribution, so people can have some sense of trust and some sense of my goodness. Also, Chris White's bill, again, marvellously and unbelievably passed by this government, actually gives permission for public procurers really to commission differently. So you commission now for local economic, social effect. Really, it's telling commissioners they don't have to go for that old bad model of best value. And our old bad model of best value essentially shifted all of our public procurement into just 3 companies, all in the name of efficiency, which isn't efficient because it deprives people of ownership, innovation and agency. So my fundamental point about cities really is cities are the loci of grouping, they're the loci of loyalty. That's where you can bind people into all manner of reciprocal relations, where people stop doing contracts that are all about what's the minimum, but start to create the relationships where we can talk about what does the maximum. And I think if we can give more and more power to local authorities, not just in the localism bill to grant rate relief by sector or by place, but to actually build in incentives so that commercial operators can in some sense donate and have some guarantee for their commercial property that's empty, that actually if they give it for 5 years they won't be penalised for it. We can start to grow those hubs. And I think that is really my major remark. The other remark that I'd like to do is ResPublica published a booklet on bonds. And one of the things that's gone wrong with this government in the desperate attempt to push out credit and capital, rightly, to the periphery, is it keeps thinking, as I said earlier, that the problem is one of the pump. They keep changing the pump. But the problem isn't the one of the pump, the problem is the one of the circulation. With all the veins, if you like, in Britain's financial body politic have collapsed, and we lack the intermediary associations to lend and to provide advice and to give capital. So therefore we have to recover those intermediary associations. And that is part of the crucial role of the city in creating these are investment-ready businesses. And I think businesses, if they start to tackle both the supply and demand, will be surprised at who would back them. But the other thing that I think cities could do is cities still lack the agency to act by themselves, in the sense that yes, they know they can go out to the bond market, yes, they know, but what is lacking is an idea that we need a local PFI that isn't PFI, basically. We need a local bit of infrastructure. And I believe at ResPublica we've come up with that, with our community infrastructure bond. And what this argues is actually, as long as the bond itself is right, we've created a vehicle that essentially wholesale capital can plug into. And it doesn't matter what supports the bond. It can be any source of income whatsoever. It can be land value, it can be money raised from traffic, it can be rents, it can be anything. And as long as that is valid, that I think creates the bottom-up agency for businesses and for, crucially, cities to actually get wholesale capital back into their cities. So I'll give that to you, Greg.
Thank you.
As part of that offer. So to sum up, the crucial role for the city is to be a guarantee organisation, a trust organisation, a facilitator, an enabler, a broker, to create through pooling, aggregation, and crucially through forms of selection. And I think in that model we can create an investment vehicle. But there are also downsides. I'm from the Northwest and I've witnessed crippling recessions. I've witnessed essentially areas of my city and areas of my country abandoned for years. And one of the fears is, and it's prompted by Andrew Lillico's work, who I value greatly, and he and I both agree on this, is there's a massive deficit time bomb in these areas, and that's house price values. If you look at what's happened in America, if you study the Case-Shiller Index, one of the crucial flaws of the Obama administration is it didn't introduce anti-foreclosure legislation. Foreclosure legislation is really important because as soon as you foreclose on a house, all the property values around that house essentially devalue and devalue and devalue again. And what you have is massive asset destruction. And in some cities in the United States, you actually got a negative value, and values dropped to like less than 20%. Now, I suspect that in the north, in households, many cities are actually on that point. Particularly look at central Manchester, the overvalued flats there, because the housing density rules were all wrong, but that was Labour, and I'll leave that to another time. This is a ticking time bomb, and this is another role for the city. Another role for the city is to come in and manage down loan values and negotiate for everybody within an area mortgage breakdown and land value breakdown. Because if you don't do that, the moment it starts, it's incredibly difficult to stop, and you get close to what's called a Fisher debt trap. And a Fisher debt trap is where the very act of selling devalues the price of your property, so it's worth, essentially, it halves through the act of trying to realise it. And that goes exponentially. And I fear that many of our cities are close to that. And so it's that role of actually being a protector of value, protector of asset value. And that also applies to commercial buildings. And I think it's that role that I see as crucial for cities, creating the conditions for growth and preventing recession. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. I think amidst all the warmth that you've heard from all of us really about what you've done as Minister for Cities, and I absolutely echo that, I think we're also in our ways all pointing out some pretty profound challenges, and I can't think of a better introduction to the Right Honourable Greg Clark, the Minister for Cities, and now a Treasury Minister, and thank God there's now a cities brief back in the Treasury, because if the Treasury takes notice, then perhaps we'll be able to really grapple with some of these big issues. But Greg, can you offer your thoughts on this key question?
Sure. Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for that, and thanks, Philip, for arranging this. It's fantastic to have standing room only at an event discussing urban Britain. And what better place than Birmingham? Here we are, the city of Chamberlain. Birmingham was not built, didn't flourish through any kind of central government blueprint. It wasn't mandated to grow and prosper. It took off because it attracted business. Business flourished there, and it was led by people in the city, the industrialists of the city, who saw it as their civic duty to contribute to the future of the city. It's the same all over the country. Take Middlesbrough, where I grew up. It was in the end of the 19th century. It was called the Infant Hercules, the fastest growing city in the empire. Again, driven by local people. If you look back over certainly the last 60 years, and quite possibly 100, we've seen the obstacles put in the way of that degree of local initiative, local difference, I think made more and more unscalable. We talk about redistribution a lot, we talk about equality, and normally we're talking about wealth and we're talking about income. But I think we should be talking about the inequalities of power across our country, especially if we want to create one nation. And if you were to have the equivalent of a Gini coefficient, such as we have for income, applied to power, I don't know, perhaps the centralisation of power, how many people have most power, a sort of a Lenin coefficient rather than a Gini coefficient, then I suspect that it's been getting more and more concentrated until I think in the last couple of years. And I don't say, and I agree with Mike, we've got a long way to go, but I think we've had a turning point over the last couple of years, because I think it has been certainly my ambition in my previous job, and I insisted on keeping the city's portfolio when I was appointed a Treasury Minister. It's essential that we continue to, in effect, give the right of initiative to cities. Why should it be the case that a minister, even a Treasury Minister in Whitehall, should be thought to have a monopoly on new ideas, on ways of doing things, and ability to enforce how things are done? It's completely the wrong way around. We should have initiative resting in people, in cities, across the whole of the country. So that's what we're determined to do. Quite a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, are not familiar with the city deals process, but so let me just say a word about that. It was sparked by a conversation that Chris Murray and I had, I think it was the spring of last year, when Chris, who heads the Core Cities Group, came as we were taking the localism bill through Parliament. I was the minister in charge of the localism bill. And Chris and his colleagues from the 8 biggest cities in the country said, this is all well and good, but what if in the future there are things that we want to do that actually we haven't thought of today as this bill is going through? Can't we do something to actually enable us to do things differently in the future than we're doing at the moment? And so in quite a short space of time, we were able to come up with a clause in the localism bill, now an act, that allows the government to devolve powers to local authorities that may not be envisaged at the moment, but rather than having primary legislation, it can be done very quickly. So that is now part of the Localism Act. And why do we need to avail ourselves of this? Why cities? A number of people have said why cities are so important. And it strikes me that among the various reasons, there is this. There's an important economic imperative to empower cities. We know that it's absolutely right and necessary to have a macroeconomic environment that is going to be supportive of growth. We know that it's right to have a microeconomic environment that's supportive of growth, making sure that the burdens on business are kept to a minimum and they're proportionate. But even if we do both of those things, if you consider where growth comes from, growth doesn't happen in the abstract. It happens in particular places. It's companies taking on extra people. It's new businesses locating in a particular place in the country, a place that you can see. It has a tangibility to it. It has a sense of place that I think for too many years has been something that's been invisible to Whitehall. There's been too much abstraction. So having a sense of place as part of our growth agenda, I think is absolutely indispensable. And why cities in particular? Well, cities, as Mike and Malcolm and others have said, bring together our best universities in the country. They are the seats that not only of learning, where people are being educated and often trained in skills that are in demand, but of research that has spin-off benefits. They're places where people come together physically, as Phillip says, in a complex global economy. Specialisation, the ability to be in close proximity to people who are doing related things is a source of the innovation that Malcolm talks about. Cities are the crucible for all that. So if there's ever a place where the future of our economy depends, it has to be cities, it seems to me. So if you're going to have a cities agenda, if you're going to, that's going to be part of your growth agenda, then the first conclusion, not even conclusion, the first thing you have to accept is that no two places are the same. Birmingham is very different from Manchester. Manchester is very different from Liverpool, just down the road. It's still different again from Liverpool and from Bristol. Every place has their traditions. Every place has their different skills. Every place has their different political cultures. Liverpool and Manchester could hardly have different political cultures. They're completely different. And so the idea of trying to have policies that are identical across every part of the country, I think is for the birds. It's not going to work. And so you have to do what we have achieved a breakthrough in the City Deals process, which was to persuade the Cabinet to say that places should be allowed to do things differently. Just because it's different from how it's done elsewhere in the country should not be a fatal objection to having something done differently in a particular city. Things can be different between places, things can be different compared to how they are nationally. That was a crucial break in the logjam to say that it is quite reasonable for people to do different things. The second thing was to say to cities themselves, you tell us what you need to grow. What are the most important things that if you had the power to make a difference, that you would do locally? And my job as Minister for Cities would be to bang the heads together of my ministerial colleagues and sometimes the civil servants that support them, and get them to be true to that commitment to allow things to be done differently. And what we've had in the space of much less than a year is a series of deals with the 8 biggest cities outside London, which go far beyond anything that was dreamed possible at the beginning of it. Manchester, where Mike comes from, has negotiated with the government a very innovative share of growth, whereby in return for investing billions of pounds worth of local money up front, they will get a share in the returns to the exchequer later on from it. Other cities have transport budgets devolved to them. Other cities, skills budgets. But in each and every case, the idea has come from the city themselves. And having achieved that with the first 8 cities, I'm very keen now to redouble it, to have a further wave of deals with those 8 cities, and to invite another cohort of cities to come to the government and say what they want to do, how they'd like to do things differently. And it seems to me that the demeanour of the government should be to look to see whether we can make that possible. It is a deal. The terminology is used advisedly. There has to be something in it for everyone. There has to be something in it for the nation, and there has to be something in it for the city. And there has to be, as with any deal, a degree of due diligence done to make sure that this is a proper deal, that the benefits purported on both sides are credible, they're meaningful, and there needs to be a bargain struck there. But just as in any other area of our life, it's possible to do deals that are in the interests of the two parties to them. And if you can do that, if you can turn the relationship that our cities have had with central government from being one of supplicants to being one of people who can come to the table of Downing Street, the cabinet table, bang the table and say, this is what we want to do for our cities, then I think we'll have made a step towards changing the way things have been for most of the last 100 years. And we might turn this Lenin coefficient that I've just invented on this ResPublica platform in the other direction. But thank you very much indeed.
Okay, I think you've got a remarkable degree of agreement from everybody here, and the question is all about how we bring it about. So it's your turn to offer your comments and questions. Can we start with the chap there and then come here?
Yes, so I just shout out, do I?
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems to me that much of this analysis isn't getting terribly far, and I want to sketch a couple of thoughts for you. So first thing that I would say is that cities are very different. So if we think about
how cities evolved. Some evolved as coastal cities, others evolved as crossroads, others as staging posts. And of the cities that Mike was mentioning around the world, so the statistic I'm aware of is that of the next 3 billion people added to the world's population, 2.8 billion are expected to be added to coastal cities. That doesn't necessarily mean that internal cities and so on are the future. Coastal cities globally are the future rather than internal cities, I think. The next thing that I would say is that if you think about how cities evolve, what do? They develop through certain kinds of clustering effects and through sucking people in because of the prosperity associated with particular added value from crossroads and so on, the kinds of things that gave rise to them. Now, between the 1920s and the 1980s, a key function, if you wanted to promote growth, was to attract businesses into an area. Businesses came into an area, they then employed relatively static people. Already over the last 20 years, and I think enormously increasingly over the forthcoming 30 years, the key to prosperity globally is going to be to attract a key set of mobile individuals. We've already seen this. Why is London the place where there's so much prosperity in the country? It's because you have a particular set of high-value individuals aggregate there. They want to locate there. Certain kinds of business couldn't locate anywhere else because that's just where all the high-skilled individuals want to be. I think that the future model for city growth is, and in fact for regional policy more generally, is going to be for cities and regions to determine a model of why certain kinds of high-value individuals, IT programmers, financial services people or whatever, should want to locate there. And there will be different things for different cities. Some cities will want to have energetic nightlife, others will want to have a nice urban greening balance, things of that sort. But I could go on, but the essential point that I'm trying to get at is that I think that you want to try to, I think that cities need to have a model of growth which is based around attracting high-value individuals, and that will be very different from the kinds of thinking that predominated in the past.
Okay, there's a chap here at the front as well. Wanted to...
You could introduce themselves.
Yeah, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's David, and I'm from Liverpool Conservatives. I was just saying we were the first city to, in the recent referendum, we didn't get a referendum, we were told that we would have a mayor. How would you square the city deal with the adoption of a mayor? Would you see that as a significant bonus or a challenge, and are traditional council structures just as efficient as mayors in delivering the bonuses that we'd like to see for our cities?
Okay, can I take those two first and then go? Greg, do you want to go first with those?
Sure. I mean, in terms of attracting people, I completely agree. But I don't think it's new. I think this is always how cities have grown. You know, Birmingham, if you go up to the top of the Hyatt and look out, you see different waves of building, accommodating people coming into the city to work, then mostly from the surrounding countryside. And clearly, if you go other places in the country, it's the same. Cities have grown and are growing around the world by attracting people to come and live in them. And I think one of the things that we can reflect on, and it's why the civic leadership is important in this, to create an attractive environment sure involves the creativity and talents of people who are there in the city already, but it involves, I think, civic leadership. If you look at what's happened in Liverpool or Manchester, for example, and indeed here in Birmingham, the decisions that have been taken by administrations, I mean, Mike Whitby, the Conservative leader of Birmingham, commissioned the library next door. That is going to be a fantastic cultural asset, it seems to me, for Birmingham. And those types of things that might have perhaps an effect on growth that's difficult to quantify, do have an effect in making a city attractive and livable. So I think that is important, and it's why I think civic leadership is so important. You know, one of the contributions that Chamberlain made to the city was to build attractive buildings, to build streets, to build really attractive and livable, including parkland. And that's why, to segue into the question about the mayor, I'm delighted as mayor of Liverpool. I think people will look back in Liverpool in 60 years' time and feel that there have been a succession of mayors of Liverpool who, many of whom, would have contributed tangible and great things to that city in a way that I think it is less easy to look back and see the contribution of councils. It's not to say that councils can't make a good contribution, but I think leadership can be very important, visible leadership. And one reason for that is that the the internationalisation of the world means that cities compete with each other as cities. Liverpool competes now with Frankfurt, with Bordeaux, with Shanghai and Bangalore for investment, in attracting global investment. A lot of this is now city to city, for the reasons that we were saying, persuading the executives of companies, deciding in a footloose way where in the world they're going to locate, persuading them that actually this is a good place to locate, not just because labour costs or productivity is attractive, but because this is a good place for their people to live. It's an attractive place to be. Now, I think that degree of leadership that can be exercised personally, and I've seen this in action with the new mayor of Liverpool on the international stage, talking to Chinese investors, talking to them face to face about the attractions of Liverpool. I think that is something that is made easier if you've got a leading figure that most other international cities have. Now, that's not to say that it is, if you don't have one, all's lost. Manchester, I think, has developed over recent years through its combined authority of the various boroughs of Manchester coming together into the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, an approach that has been very effective. But I think that each city does need to address this question of leadership, either by looking at the Manchester example or at the example of, frankly, London, Liverpool, Leicester and Bristol, and choosing for itself. But leadership counts.
Malcolm, if we're in trouble, you're absolutely screwed if the future's global is coastal cities.
Well, I'm going to say, I mean, I'm not sure where I go in with that. I find that having a coastline and attracting high-value individuals is our future success. Especially since I've been in Berlin and Munich in the last week. I think they will probably agree with me. But I just want to pick up a number of points. I mean, first of all, on the question about leadership, I mean, I think Greg quite rightly made the point that every city is very individual and has different political cultures. I mean, I think that what was noticeable in Birmingham was how decisively the vote, well, first of all, actually, how indifferent people were to the idea of having a mayor, and how decisively it was rejected. And I think also that Mike Ridley, I think, will challenge the fact that he was not able to go out and travel the world and be a very effective advocate globally for the city, which is why we've developed a lot of Chinese investment, the example I gave earlier. And that's just part of the way we're doing things. And I think Albert Ball will do the same thing. Because Birmingham has always actually had, I would say, a slightly more collegiate approach to politics than some other cities in terms of civic leadership over many generations, which is why we are where we are now. But I just want to come back, if I may, very briefly to some points that Phillip Blond made, because I think the points that he made generally about managing supply chains are not predominantly a city issue, actually. I mean, one of the reasons why we have a thriving car industry in this country, a thriving global car industry, is because we've actually managed that supply chain process over the last 20 years more effectively than anyone else, using a lot of the skills of the Japanese. Which is why actually we're taking on more people building cars here, whereas the French are about to close a major plant. And that's an interesting case study to look at. But I do agree with him that I think cities are a place which we can do that sensibly. And actually, I mean, high-value individuals, we want them to come and invest in our growing businesses. And they might like to live in San Diego by the coastline, but we want them to invest here because we have people, young people, who know how to run companies and have the skills to develop them. Because after all, capital is very open. And there are plenty of very high-value individuals who live all over the place but want to invest in great city enterprises. And I think that that's something that we are very happy to accept. You're shaking your head.
Okay. No, that's to miss the point. The point is the high-value individuals being ones who generate lots of added value with their work. They're IT professionals, the financial services professionals, the lawyers, things of that sort. That's the so
people who want to start a business, I agree with you. You live coastal cities.
Can I Chris just say what, and then Philip?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, well, depending on your view on climate change, some coastal cities might have quite a problem in the future. But I think there's a sort of aligning two issues here. One is what is the right strategy for your city economically, and the other is the ability to deliver that strategy. So, and I think we've been quite good at developing first in this country, and not so good giving the powers to do the latter. And the deals are really critical to that process. And Phillip gave a good example of this, which is about financing and the ability to generate finance. Now, bonds are one of several innovative mechanisms that we can use to do that. When I speak to our city treasurers, they tell me, well, bonds are just a way of borrowing unless you can crack the balance sheet on off balance sheet issue. And they don't. The problem for them isn't borrowing. They can access the borrowing. It's paying it back, and that's all about revenues, as you said. So one of the really critical steps forward in the deals is it provides access to some new revenue streams, which allow you the ability to implement whatever strategy is that you think is right for your city going forward.
I mean, just what Andrew said. Look, one of the things that bothered me is whenever you read, for instance, any equality and diversity strategy, it's always exactly the same. Similarly, when you read any from the previous RDAs, all of their strategies were exactly the same. They're all saying like green growth. And I agree with you in that sense, Andrew. What cities have to look at, what are their comparative competitive advantages? That's the only real question. But what I would say is, what I've always hated about the social mobility language, and I do kind of detest it, is it says that success is escape. Success is abandoning your community, your locality, and getting out. And it also suggests that you're kind of quite happy with leaving everyone else to failure. And so what I'm much more interested in, and I agree with you about attracting those individuals, is then there's what do you do with people who are already there? What do you do with the communities who are already there? Because, they're a massive productive asset, but if you don't use them properly, they're a huge cost. So the key question is how do you tie your comparative advantage with the talent and the needs that you have with the people you want to attract? And really, we need different city strategies. And certainly we need different city strategies between cities that are closer to one another. And there's a sense in which, and just let me repeat, and look, what you said about supply chains didn't contradict me at all, because what I was trying to suggest is future jobs are going to come from small businesses, they're not going to come from big businesses. How do you get successful small businesses? Network effects, relationship effects, supply chain competition, period. So the interesting question then, if I was a city, is you look at, well, what's our knowledge base? There'll be the universities. Not all universities are good at the same thing. And then you'll ask, what are our talents? And the real task is how do you mesh the people you want to retain, and nobody talks about retention, but people love Liverpool, desperate to stay there, but they leave because there are no jobs. How do you retain talent and then key it in with local need? And I think that's the real question. The interesting thing about attracting big business, I remember I went to Derby to speak, and it has the most wonderful art centre. I was going, gosh, wow. I was an innocent man, still am probably. And I thought, why has it got such a wonderful art centre in Derby? It's better than any, cathedral towns. My father said, there's Rolls-Royces there. And Rolls-Royce wants its highly educated engineers to feel they're in a nice environment. And that's what I think is interesting. This is just another idea for you, Greg. Business improvement districts, where you actually get everybody to come together to improve a neighbourhood. Why restrict that just to business? Why not extend that to the whole community? So the whole communities and citizens can start to create the comparative advantage, precisely in order to attract the people that Andrew spoke about.
I have to say, for me, I think that the point about talent is absolutely right, and I think it speaks to a wider issue, which is that what Greg has done is to breach the dike of Whitehall centralism with some really important, cutting-edge city deals. But the fact is that if we are going to leverage the assets that our cities have got, the universities, the big companies, the networks of creative businesses, we're going to have, as city leaders, to have some more tools to play with going forward, so that we can really catalyse growth. but by doing deals with those businesses, by doing deals with groups of companies, groups of entrepreneurs. And it is a sad fact that the bits of government that seemed least interested in the city deals process were probably those who were some of the most important in being able to leverage those assets. So I think that's an ongoing conversation we want to have, because I hope the door is open to a process, but one we've got to go through the door.
The interesting thing about the Liverpool City deal is the localisation of welfare, and even your needs are assets. So even your problems are assets because they come with capital and they come with a revenue stream. And one of the problems, for instance, in the work programme is we never brought together skills with job creation. We tried. And everybody knows and everybody nods, but it's cities that actually offer you the chance to group those services together and get multiplier benefits.
All right, can I have another round of questions in, because time's going to beat us soon. So can you put your hand up if I see two hands in the middle there.
Thanks very much. Richard Kay from JP Morgan. I remember before the financial crisis, we were all being asked what makes for a successful financial city, and countries around the world were saying, how did London and New York get it all so right? And we were always writing papers about it, and there were conferences. Well, funnily enough, that hasn't happened in the last few years, and maybe a question for some as to whether financial cities are a good thing. In my mind, inevitably, a successful financial city brings great benefits to a city, and not just the city in which the predominant financial centre is, but other cities around the country. Anyway, the main point is that in this post-crisis world, and with many political ramifications for finance and cities, etc., we're going to have to think differently about how you attract big multinational companies to cities. And there is a sense that in certain parts of the world, particularly in the United States and beyond, there is massive more power at the disposal of local authorities to do deals which encourage large companies to establish. And in Europe, we have a state aid regime that makes that type of incentive very much harder to do. This wasn't a problem up to now when in Europe, when things were going well. It wasn't a problem for the United Kingdom. We wanted actually fewer people in London and more people in other cities. And as we look ahead, with all the very many challenges that I'm sure Greg and other ministers will help to minimise, but we need to look and understand, how do we compete with Singapore or the different cities up and down the United States, each compete with each other to bring relatively small facilities from big companies. Well, I don't know whether we have the tools to do that here, and I'm not sure what we do about it.
Okay, thank you very much. And just in front of you.
Hi, my name's Liz Hutchins from Friends of the Earth. I really understand the point about every city needs to have its individual solutions, but one of the things that cities need to find solutions to is climate change, mitigation and adaptation. And linking to the last point, I think that UK cities are a lot of them are missing a really big opportunity with the green economy. And worldwide, there's a grouping of C40 biggest cities in the world tackling climate change. And here in the UK, of local authorities, 2/3 of them are either scrapping or cutting back their climate change action, and that's happened since the coalition took over. So I'd really like to know, Greg, I know you were aware of this issue before the election. Is there something, what can you do in your new position to really advance this agenda of cities tackling climate change as one of the central things that they do?
Are there any more questions? No, in that case, can I invite everybody to say something about this question about state aid and how we can really... is the only alternative, frankly, that we come out of the European Union and state aid rules go, or is there something more we can do within the rules to really enable us to at least fight on something like level terms with some other jurisdictions? And secondly, are we really missing the opportunity of green growth? And if we go from left to right, we'll wrap up.
Okay. Well, I think first of all state aid rules do have to be applied consistently, and I think that sometimes British civil servants are sometimes afraid to stretch the envelopes of those rules. That's my observation, which I have some direct experience, and I think that currently this government is being rather more ambitious in what it can do. But equally, I think that some of the rules specifically related to network industries and other things are becoming much more sensible. But coming back to Richard's point though about the importance of cities and finance, one of the other things we didn't talk about was I think the whole idea about having city banks or community institutions, or we have a very successful venture here called the Black Country Reinvestment Society, and that's something that we should follow through. And finally, on climate change, I would just comment in linking to what I said earlier, just reminding people about the importance of procurement. That Birmingham City is about to embark on a major project with European Union money to do with climate change projects and social housing. And there are lots of opportunities to use public procurement to innovate in areas of climate change, which I think are something we should be encouraging much more than we are now.
I agree with the points about local powers being really important in that respect, and it's self-evident when you look at the research around that. The rest of Europe, I wonder sometimes how worried they are about state aid, compared to us. And there's some representation going on that at the moment around European structural funds, which we're involved in as a group of cities. Climate change, I really agree with that. I really take that point. It's very important to all of our cities to working collectively on it. We just put a Core Cities Green Deal offer into government. I think that it will be, I hope it will be a major part of the deals going forward. And just one quick bit of research on that. Research project called Good Growth, Pricewaterhouse, showed that when you apply sustainability costs to the competitiveness of countries, the UK falls from a relatively high ranking in the OECD to second from bottom out of the top 14 countries. And what that tells us is that we're really storing up trouble in our economy and our competitiveness for the future if we don't deal with those issues in the short to medium term.
Okay, thanks Chris. Greg?
Well, in terms of attracting businesses, one of the big changes that's been made in recent years is that it's now possible for councils to retain the benefit of the business rate increase that newly located businesses bring. I mean, amazingly, in the past, if you attracted new businesses, financially at least, it was a matter of indifference to the council. It all got sucked up to the Treasury. Now that can be retained, and not only retained, you can then borrow against the prospect of that if it's credible. And you can imagine particular developments that need some prior investment by the city that are going to unlock business rates. So you're now able to do that for the first time. So that's a big change that's been made in the last couple of years. But what I would say is that I don't think it's a sustainable model for UK cities to be kind of, chasing companies down the road, offering them ever bigger suitcases full of cash. I think they need to attract them, but they need to attract them by making, as Andrew said earlier, their city an attractive place and a competitive place to be. So to make sure that the infrastructure is adequate to do that, to make sure that you've got attractive cultural facilities, to invest in skills, to make sure that the people who are prospectively going to be employed have the skills that are needed. They are the types of investments that I'd like to see, rather than a kind of bidding war of who can pay the biggest bribe, as it were, to get a firm to locate. And of course, it's true to say that multinationals will be a source of jobs, but small businesses will as well. One of the most attractive parts of the city deal was Nottingham's creative quarter, where it is creating a local environment for startups explicitly to put everything in place that is attractive to firms from around the country and around the world who are starting quite small. So I think that's important. And I think the same applies to climate change. We've got our national policies on climate change, but actually the experience that I've found in negotiating city deals with the 8 cities so far is that often they've wanted to go further themselves in more exacting standards for climate change. So Birmingham, for example, and indeed Manchester, looking to advance the take-up of the Green Deal beyond what was previously there. If you look at Bristol, Bristol's going to create a metro taking cars off the roads. That is solving 2 problems for Bristol, more than 2. It's solving the congestion and accessibility problem. It's also helping with climate change. So I think the experience in this area is that if you think everything problems can only be solved at the national level, then actually you miss out on a huge amount of creativity. That if you just say, well, over to you, you make some suggestions, you unlock a great deal of potential that can then be realised and is being realised at the moment.
A brief final word, Philip?
Yeah, just to echo that, if I may repeat a story Zach Goldsmith told me, but it's remained with me, and he was talking about, I think he said, Copenhagen, and when they introduced a general carbon tax, everybody hated it. But when they introduced a hypothecated tax that was only levied on pollution-producing vehicles, and they hypothecated the return, they produced more beautiful environments, it became massively popular. And actually, it's this type of local innovation that is the only thing that can save sort of the green agenda from current green ideology. Because the terrifying thing is a popular mass agenda to make places more beautiful, clean, safe biodiversity has been captured by an agenda that's about something people can't see, that involves taxation, bureaucracy, and regulation. No wonder it's unpopular. So I feel that actually restoring local power to enable cities to innovate around things that people care about, and we've got to broaden the green agenda again to include cleanliness, beauty, and the look of an area. That, and only that, can actually make green politics popular again. So in that sense, I'm with you, Greg, on it's actually non-centralised approaches to the green agenda that will revive the green agenda. It's centralised approaches to the green agenda that have destroyed it.
Absolutely. Can't think of a better way to end our discussion. Can I thank you, Philip, for organising this excellent discussion, and to the Core Cities for sponsoring it, you for your patience, and especially to Greg for being so open, honest, and for staying the duration, unlike some people at fringe meetings. It's always appreciated. Thank you very much.